President Donald Trump will be the president that allows for the complete destruction of the small.
There's a big label on these backhoes that says proudly built in the USA. But the truth is the biggest companies that make farm equipment and construction equipment like this,
hats off to the future.
They've been moving their jobs overseas.
Can you hear that? That's the silence across the fields. Not because the harvest is done, but because no one's buying the crops anymore. John Deere has stopped delivering machines. Bunge won't renew its contracts. Cargill has stopped buying domestic corn. All of them, names that once stood with American farmers, are slowly shifting north toward Canada, where there are incentives, where policies are stable. And here, all that's left is land debt and a bitter feeling deep inside. They say they stand with the farmers, but when we needed them most, they disappeared. No warning, no apology. So what now? When the fields go unharvested, when the machines gather dust, when supply chains fall apart and food prices spiral out of control. If you think this only affects the farmers, take another look at the bread you ate this morning. It might no longer be made from American wheat. And if that doesn't scare you, maybe you've never seen what it looks like when a country loses the power to feed itself. This is no longer a fair game. The corporations have walked away. There's one thing American farmers understand clearly now: in the game of corporations, not everyone gets a seat at the table. They used to be essential pillars, partners, customers, and the foundation of the agricultural supply chain. But when profits stopped coming from domestic farmland, those promises of growing together vanished just as fast. Since 2023, a quiet withdrawal has begun. Companies that supplied seeds, machinery, fertilizers, and logistics, once deeply connected to farmers, have started downsizing or shifting their investments to Canada. And they're not coming back. No announcements, no explanations, just contracts left unrenewed, unanswered emails, and service stations shutting down without warning. Many farmers across the Midwest now have to drive hundreds of miles just to repair a tractor or pay twice as much for replacement parts, if they're lucky enough to find any in stock. Meanwhile, the same corporations that once served them are expanding in Alberta and Saskatchewan, offering incentives American farmers can only dream of. The frustration doesn't come from financial loss. It comes from feeling abandoned. According to data from the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City, production costs have been rising continuously over the past 2 years, but corporate purchase prices have either stayed flat or declined. And what breaks farmers' hearts the most is this: no one in the system sees them as essential anymore. We plant seeds without knowing who will buy them. This isn't production, it's gambling. In a game where the rules were never made for them, many have chosen to walk away. Not because they're weak, but because they've realized the playing field is already owned, cold hands and strategies that have lost all connection to the land. Cargill, Bunge, John Deere. When those who once stayed now walk away. They used to say, "We'll never abandon American farmers," but then one day everything disappeared without warning. For many American farmers, the sense of betrayal doesn't come from the government, but from names once so familiar they appeared in every family meeting, in every fertilizer invoice, every machine order, every post-harvest deal. Names like Cargill, Bunge, John Deere. These weren't just corporations. They were once symbols of a promise: domestic production, domestic purchasing, domestic investment. But by 2025, people began to speak their names with disappointment. The first to back out wasn't small. It was Cargill, the quiet giant. After more than 100 years tied to American agriculture, its soybean and corn purchasing system in the Midwest began to shut down one station at a time. Collection sites were sold off, emails replied with cold formality, contracts delayed or under review. From being a loyal customer, farmers suddenly found themselves treated like strangers. According to the USDA, the volume of grain Cargill imported from Canada jumped nearly 30% in just 1 year, while its domestic buying collapsed. The worst feeling isn't losing a client, it's being replaced. A Nebraska farmer who had sold corn to Cargill for over 20 years said, "I get that they need to make money, but at least tell us so we can prepare." But no one said anything. No community meetings, no explanations. They just left. Not long after it was Bunge's turn. Once seen as Cargill's biggest rival, Bunge pulled off a high-profile deal, a merger with Betrayal, Canada's top agribusiness company. At first, many farmers held on to hope, thinking this would open markets, increase crop prices. But they were wrong. That $34 billion deal quickly became numbers no one in Iowa wanted to see. Bunge poured nearly $500 million into logistics infrastructure in Saskatchewan, while grain stations in Illinois and Missouri went silent. Since mid-2024, many farmers have reported they no longer receive contract renewals from Bunge, a first in over a decade. No negotiations, no rejections, just no calls. and so corn farmers in the plains have had to sell to middlemen at prices 10% lower than the previous year. Not because the crop was bad, but because the major players had walked away. When the machines turned their backs too, the blow became complete. John Deere, a name tied to almost every American farm, is now heavily investing in assembly plants in Canada, while shrinking its service departments in the very market that supported it for over 150 years. Hundreds of maintenance technicians were laid off. Independent repair shops in Ohio, Indiana, Kansas no longer receive parts on time. Some farmers have to wait 3 to 5 weeks just to replace a small part, and in agriculture a few weeks can mean the difference between a successful harvest and a financial disaster. We still have good machines, but when they break, it's like we're importing from Europe. And while we wait, who pays for the lost season, a farmer in Illinois said. What John Deere once offered wasn't just tractors. It was support, a sense of partnership, but now that green logo is slowly disappearing from American soil in every sense. What hurts farmers the most is that all of this happened in complete silence. No one spoke up, no one apologized, and no one explained. The disappointment doesn't come from bad policy, it comes from a series of decisions that deliberately turned away from home. Once the corporation saw profits north of the border, they had no reason to look back. Canada offers subsidies, tax breaks, and a more flexible logistics chain, and they chose the easier path. And American farmers, they're still trying to survive through rising costs, falling prices, and the quiet collapse of relationships they once thought would last. A wheat farmer in Kansas told USA, "Today he felt like I've been kicked out of a house I helped build with my own hands. Those who once supported Buy American, who believed in domestic supply chains, now look around and find no one left. When the corporations that helped build America turn their backs to chase profits elsewhere, those left behind, the ones who plant, plow, and harvest, are left only with the land and the silence of machines that no longer run. And that's not just an economic shock. It's a collapse of spirit, a symbol twisted out of shape, an unanswered question. If even those who stayed have left, who will stay with the American farmer? No one told us. We only knew when our names disappeared." There was no phone call, no official notice, just silence, and suddenly your name is gone from the buyer list. No new contract, no confirmation email, no mention of last year. Farmers only find out they've been cut when the pricing sheet shows every name except their own 2 weeks after planting season has already begun. Every season used to start with a simple belief that someone somewhere still needed what we grew, but by 2025, more and more farmers have no idea who they're growing for. The days when farmers were a central pillar of the supply chain are gone. Now they're an afterthought, quietly erased like a negative number deleted from a spreadsheet. There's no warning, no heads up, no one takes responsibility. They just see the fertilizer supplier close up shop, the grain elevator move locations, the old buyer stop answering calls. The line goes dead. And just like that, they're cut from a system they've helped feed for decades as if they were never there. That's when the truth hits, you're no longer needed. Even if you bought thousands of seed bags, delivered corn faithfully each season, serviced your John Deere on schedule, paid off every loan on time, even if you were loyal essential. Now you're just a burden. A farmer in Kansas said he only found out he was no longer a partner when his son visited the company's website and couldn't find their farm ID. They didn't say you don't qualify anymore. They didn't say we're shifting directions. They did one thing, silently crossed him off the list. And suddenly loyalty became obsolete. Not being on the list doesn't just mean you lost a buyer. It means you lost access to everything that keeps the operation alive. No more priority for fertilizer. No early info on pricing. No technician guaranteed within 72 hours. Once you're off the list, you're no longer part of the production ecosystem. You're just excess. The most painful part isn't the money, it's the absence of a warning. No chance to respond, no apology, just a chilling clarity you've been replaced. By a bigger farm in Canada. By a partner that's easier to manage. By a less risky supplier. And in an agricultural system that once prided itself on being the engine that feeds America, losing your name is like losing your identity. Farmers were used to having contracts, buyers, and a name in the system every season. Without that, they don't just lose income, they lose their place, their reason to keep going. Fear isn't just a vague feeling anymore, it's real. One day you might plant a full crop harvest every row and no one will take it, not because it's poor quality, but because you were cut out of the plan long ago and no one told you. And in that moment of realization, many farmers choose to walk away. Not because they're lazy, not because they've given up, but because they know planting without a name on the list is the fastest path to bankruptcy. And no one will even remember you were there. They don't bother with goodbyes, because they never thought you mattered enough to deserve one. When what's grown becomes a burden on the buyer. When a shopper walks into a grocery store and sees the price of bread jump by 20%, they're not thinking about abstract market fluctuations. They're feeling the weight of a food system that's no longer balanced. Every loaf of bread, every bag of cereal has become a burden passed down to the buyer because America's domestic agricultural engine is falling apart. Major chains like Walmart, Kroger, and Safeway have all raised the alarm. Input costs, especially for wheat and corn, are surging, and they can't keep quiet when flour imports from Canada come with steep logistics fees, forcing retail prices to rise just to preserve profit margins. It's the consumer who shoulders that entire gap. Over the past 12 months, bread prices have risen 15 to 25%, and cereal for breakfast is up as much as 30%. For many working families, that means reworking the entire household budget. One middle-aged couple living in the Detroit suburbs said they used to spend around $50 a week on groceries. Now they need to tack on another $15, $20 just to keep their kids' breakfast routine the same. As the bill rises, their only options are cutting portion sizes or switching to less nutritious foods, which inevitably affects energy levels, school performance, and job productivity. And it's not just everyday shoppers feeling the squeeze. Small bakeries, budget coffee shops, and sandwich stalls near industrial parks are hurting too. Many have raised prices by $1.50 to $2 per item or been forced to shrink servings. According to the National Restaurant Association, 38% of independent eateries have either slashed their menus or shut down due to skyrocketing ingredient costs. In a fragile sector like food service, these price shocks are enough to shutter local shops, and with them go jobs, community services, and the comfort of everyday routines for working-class Americans. The pain extends even further into schools, hospitals, and workplace cafeterias. Institutions are switching to cheaper, lower-fiber, additive-heavy foods not by choice, but because they simply have no alternatives. Rand Corporation reports that missing adequate nutrition in the morning can slash productivity by 3 to 5%. For organizations, that means lower output and higher healthcare costs, a vicious cycle where once again it's the consumer footing the bill. If that still sounds like a macroeconomic issue, meet Tom, a truck driver from Texas. Every morning he now faces a choice: skip breakfast or spend an extra $2 for a simple bread and coffee combo. When rising prices reflect scarcity and no real substitute exists, even small decisions become a warning sign the cost of living is crossing a dangerous line. Consumers once believed in domestic farming, the promise of a farm-to-table system under control. But as big agri-corporations pull out and prices soar, people are realizing they've been left holding the bag for a broken model, one that's fragile, unsustainable, and defenseless against global disruption. A 2024 survey from the Consumer Federation of America found that over 60% of households earning under $50,000 a year had to cut back on food expenses due to rising prices, and in most cases, breakfast was the first thing to go. When energy dips, moods drop, and focus fades, the ability to work, study, or make sound decisions takes a real hit. This isn't just an economic crisis anymore, it's a public health emergency, a warning shot for social instability. Instead of cheaper food, working families are now forced to accept food that's simply less nutritious. And that comes with long-term consequences, especially for kids and seniors, the most vulnerable among us. Poor nutrition triggers cascading health effects, digestive problems, rising blood pressure, and even early-onset chronic illness. At community clinics in Florida and Texas, ER visits between 2 to 5 p.m. have jumped 8-11%, and they're tying it directly to what people ate or didn't eat that morning. But maybe the most dangerous piece of this story is the one you don't see: the invisible cost. Lower workplace output, rising medical bills, declining school performance, more pressure on middle-class families financially and emotionally. When everyone from farmers to factory workers to school kids is affected, this isn't just a food crisis. It's a full-blown social breakdown in progress. Look at a small bakery in Dayton, Ohio. The owner puts it plainly: if I raise my sandwich by 50 cents, customers ghost me. If I don't, I go under. I'm stuck between math and my community's pain. This isn't just about business risks. It's about cultural loss, neighborhood erosion, because those bakeries and local cafes are part of the American fabric, symbols of prosperity, places of connection. Now, with farmers unable to plant enough, supply chains in disarray, and consumers paying more, the cost isn't just in dollars. It's in health, peace of mind, and trust in a system that once promised stability. The crisis isn't somewhere far off. It's happening here right now, with every breakfast skipped, every overpriced loaf, every watered-down coffee cup on a tired Monday morning. The question isn't who's to blame, it's how do we break this cycle? Without urgent action, without real policy reform, it won't just be prices going up. It'll be the working class falling down. And the scariest part, most won't even realize what's happening until that $2 sandwich becomes $6. And breakfast, the most basic of daily rituals, becomes a luxury. And when the most basic things are no longer guaranteed, we're left with two choices: change the system or watch it collapse before our eyes. Not because we didn't care, but because we ran out of ways to move forward. Canada didn't undercut us. They just waited for America to step aside. There was no hostile takeover, no tariff war, no threats from Canada, just patience. And eventually America quietly stepped out of the game. While American farmers walked away from their fields abandoned by corporations stripped of subsidies, Canadian farmers were quietly expanding. Backed by stable financial tools and long-term investment policies, they didn't have to undercut anyone. They simply filled the space America left behind. In provinces like Saskatchewan and Manitoba, wheat acreage has grown by 6 to 8% annually since 2023. Investments have surged across the supply chain from flour mills and storage silos to shipping terminals. In the past 2 years alone, the Canadian government has poured over 1 billion CAD into shielding its farmers from climate volatility and global price swings. No grandstanding, no interference, just a solid system built to be ready when the moment came. And the moment came when the US began running out of steam. According to a USDA report from June 2025, America is expected to import roughly 150 million bushels of wheat, an 8% increase from last year. Meanwhile, US spring wheat acreage is at its lowest level since 1970, only about 9.4 million acres. The gap couldn't be clearer. And Canada stepped in. This wasn't about Canada flooding American supermarkets with cheap grain. There was no aggressive price war, no shady playbook. They simply showed up when America no longer had enough to offer. No discounts, no flashy marketing. American food companies came knocking on their door, not because Canadian wheat was cheaper, but because it was reliable. And that's when the irony hit home. America, in trying to rebuild and protect its domestic agriculture, had unintentionally opened the gates for someone else to take its place. Not because we lacked the resources, but because we failed to protect the very people who feed us. Canada never needed to win the agricultural war. They just needed to hold steady. As America stumbled through internal crises, Canada kept things running, planting, harvesting, delivering. No drama, no lawsuits, just a system built not to fail. Every bag of imported Canadian wheat now carries a quiet message, one too sharp to ignore. If a nation doesn't protect its farmers, it will one day pay to buy back the very food it once produced at a higher price. And by then, no one needs to undercut America, because America will have already stepped away from the very soil that once sustained it. If Canada stops exporting, who will save the American dinner table? Americans never imagined waking up to a morning without toast, but they also never imagined becoming almost entirely dependent on Canada for their wheat supply. Yet here we are in 2025, Canada is supplying over 60% of all wheat imported into the US, according to USDA data. And now one question looms louder than ever. What happens to America's kitchen tables if Canada stops exporting tomorrow? This isn't some far-off what-if scenario anymore. Climate change is already reshaping global agriculture, and Canada isn't immune. According to the latest forecasts from climate AI, key wheat-producing provinces like Alberta and Saskatchewan are facing their driest summer in 15 years. In the worst case, wheat yields could drop by 8–12%, forcing Canada to cut exports just to protect its own food supply. And the US. There's no fallback plan, no domestic capacity left to ramp up, no strategic stockpiles to fall back on, no quick affordable substitutes from South America or Europe. Those routes are too far too expensive and too slow. We've run out of options. Some American consumers may still think this won't affect them until they walk into a grocery store and see a loaf of bread jump from $3 to $5.50 in just 2 weeks. When Canadian supply runs short, U.S. distributors will scramble to import from Europe or Australia, but the distance logistics and mismatched processing capacity will drive prices sky-high fast and furious. And the ripple effect, it hits everything. Fast food chains, food manufacturers, schools, hospitals, all will have to either cut serving sizes, raise prices, or eliminate services. This isn't just a line item in a supply chain report. It's real people being forced to swap out nutritious meals for cheap fillers. It's kids going to school hungry because breakfast became too expensive to afford. The most painful truth. This crisis wasn't caused by a foreign adversary. It was made in America by years of neglecting the very system that once fed the world. We let our wheat industry wither. We dismantled supply chains. And now the survival of the American dinner table depends on whether another country decides to keep shipping us food. If you think this scenario is still in the distance, think again. Retailers are already making moves. Several major chains have placed early import orders from Europe in Q3, anticipating Canada's possible production cutbacks. And if that happens, we're not just talking about higher prices. We're talking about a full-blown household spending crisis for working-class families across the country. So who will save the American dinner table? The hard truth. It's no longer in our hands. And maybe that more than anything is the wake-up call we've ignored for far too long. No one ever imagined that America, once proudly known as the breadbasket of the world, would one day have to worry about something as basic as breakfast. But when the very people who once fed this nation are left behind, when corporations pull out without a word, and when our entire supply chain hinges on decisions made in another country, even the most ordinary things can suddenly become a luxury. So if tomorrow your local store runs out of flour, if a simple sandwich costs twice what it did last week, who will you blame? And if the farmers who once fed this country can no longer survive, what's left for us to be proud of? This video does not promote division or advocate for any form of secession. All content presented here is intended to explore, analyze, and spark thoughtful discussion around real events, emotions, and current social trends. We respect the Constitution of the United States and all federal regulations. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the next analysis that mainstream media often overlooks. What you're hearing is an independent perspective grounded in real data, not meant to stir fear, but to help us wake up before it's too late.